You're listening to the Nerd Best Friends podcast. If you know what RSS stands for, you're in the right place.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Nerd Best Friends. We're at episode 7. This is Annalise, and I'm here with my best friend, Rob.
Hey, it's me, Rob, your best friend, your podcast host, and your cosplay costume contest judge.
Ooh, very fancy. This episode, speaking of cosplay, we're going to be talking about cons, particularly San Diego Comic-Con, probably the most famous one of them all, and nerd cons in general. But before we get there, Rob, what is our craft beer of the episode?
Craft beer. The episode this week is, we're going to go with the whole brewery. We're going to talk about Golden Road Brewery in Los Angeles, California. They make a number of delicious beers, and they're pretty local to us. They run a good gamut of different kinds of beers. If you were to look at the bell curve, they have things on both ends. They've got nice, strong, hoppy IPAs, and they also have fruit flavors, melon cart, watermelon cart, things like that. They are fun, and they are pretty prevalent around the Los Angeles area if you find yourself there. Other things of note is their involvement with the Heal the Bay conservation efforts, where they do ocean cleanups and things like that, which is always worthy to shout out. So Golden Road Brewery is our craft beer of the week, or episode, excuse me.
Thank you for that, Rob. And how about Nerd Mail?
Nerd Mail. I did get some feedback from listener Rose, wrote in after listening to one of our earlier episodes about 80s movies and those different genres that we liked. And she said that in her family, they also always have to differentiate between 80s PG-13 and now PG-13, because there's a big difference there.
Yes, there is. And you mean in reference to like what they show their kids?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. For sure. And for me, I've received some great feedback and reviews about The Wisdom of Gunkles, which Michael was our guest last episode. Lots of positive feedback about that book and some questions on where to get it. So wisdomofgunkles.com, or do a search for it, and you can find the book pretty much anywhere you would buy a book right now. So thanks for listening to that episode. And Michael, I hope the book sales and tour is going well.
I had a really good time talking with Michael, and I hope people enjoyed that episode.
Agreed. Same. It was very nice for all the weaving we have our past with him in band in high school, but also just reconnecting as adults and about something so particular was very nice.
So this week we're talking about cons, in specifically conventions like comic book conventions. We'll call themselves Comic-Con, although that is a licensed company name. So where many cities called themselves Salt Lake Comic-Con, Las Vegas Comic-Con, etc., the Comic-Con company itself actually put a stop to that. So your favorite con in your area might go by a different name now, but it is still the same gigantic hub of nerdery.
We're looking at the history of cons, in particular, the Comic-Con as a company is all based out of a con that started in San Diego, focused on comic books in 1970. So the San Diego Comic-Con celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2020 and did a virtual Comic-Con due to the pandemic. But in that 50 years, what we know as Comic-Con has evolved from a few hundred people in a room talking to creators and content makers and people looking for backing and selling their comic books to this huge extravaganza of celebrating nerdisms across the spectrum, which really falls into all these things we talk about in our podcast. If I'm not mistaken, Rob, you have never been to a Comic-Con.
No, I have never been to an official Comic-Con or one of these big media events that they are like now. I have been to local comic book conventions, hilariously very similar to how you would describe Comic-Con in the late 50s or early 60s. A big parking lot full of tables and coverings with people and all their long boxes out and their collectors and going around and doing some shopping and trying to find those missing pieces of your collection and things like that. That was pretty fun. And then just some very small conventions one called Nerdtacular in Salt Lake City. I went to a couple times. A tight-knit group of like a podcast network and some artists and things that I had a really good time at. But there was some cosplay there, and you know, you go out of town and you stay. But nothing quite so big as what we're going to be talking about today.
I know that something we've mentioned in previous episodes is that as nerdism has evolved, the idea behind a con is really pretty open-ended. You could have a con about anything you're nerdy about, right? The Walking Dead, the fandom of The Walking Dead, there's Walking Dead cons all over the country consistently where they bring in actors from the show and they're all over different states. I know I've seen that like on Facebook or social medias. You mentioned jokingly once someday down the line, we'll have NerdBestFriends Con, which we bring together people who just want to talk about all the nerdy things and play tabletop games and just hang out and talk about the craft beers and whatever. I don't know that I've ever been to anything like it, which is odd because I love these types of things. I've been to CES, which is the Consumer Electronics Show, which is more of a trade show because it's displaying the upcoming electronics. And then same idea, there are smaller rooms of this giant show in Las Vegas where people are looking for backing for products. It's kind of like a Kickstarter, but in person. And that alone is a little bit of a con because can we argue that cons have also become trade shows, right? The entertainment industry has really turned Comic-Con on its ear, particularly in San Diego, where it's become a media blitz for anything and everything related to nerds and comic books. And I think our two guests today are going to help us kind of sift through that. Two people that have been to Comic Cons, particularly San Diego Comic-Con, not only as guests of the Comic-Con, but also presenters for well over a decade and a half to give us some insight on what Comic-Con actually is.
Conventions are famous for their cosplay, and cosplay is different than dress up, right? It's different than Halloween. In Halloween, you're going to a party, you go to the Halloween store that sets up in, early August, in the old abandoned warehouse district, and you pick something up and you wear it to your costume. Cosplay is a handcrafted, diligently detailed, oftentimes homemade, using professional grade quality prop making skills, tools, and materials to produce just absolutely incredible costumes that are prevalent at these cons. I would say one of the most fun and nerdy things that I started doing was in my Instagram feed, following cosplayers and people that make these costumes and seeing like making swords out of foam and making them light up, and the painting techniques and the artistry with engineering and the drafting and the failures and successes of these people that are walking around with 16-foot wingspans that, angel wings that grow out of their back and move and flap. There's some incredible things going on in that community, and I think it's really interesting to see.
So we spoke to two people much more versed in the con universe than Rob or myself. They are two people who work in the entertainment industry as well, Andrea Avila and Tamara Brooks.
And Annalise had a chance to sit down and interview those two people, and that was pre-recorded, so we're going to put that in now. Enjoy.
I would like to welcome our two guests here with us today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
I'm Tamara Brooks. I am a somewhat lapsed, but still active on the Twitters, freelance entertainment journalist, among other things of my day job. And yeah, I'm an Omni Nerd, and we'll get into that later.
Andrea, Avila, Weiler. So how I pay the bills is I work within their film technology team as a distribution technologist. So I would say I'm a tech nerd in my day-to-day, but outside of that, I'm a dilettante nerd, as I like to dabble in a variety of things, but have yet to become quite the expert.
Very wonderful. Do you prefer that we call you Andrea, or can we call you Drea? What would you like to be called?
Call me Drea, because I know y'all.
All right. So a little bit of nerd connections before we continue. We do this with all of our guests. So the nerd connections here is that I marched in the USC marching band with both Drea and Tamara. We were in the same class. So 4 years in the Trojan marching band, and then now a lifetime sense of nerdy type connections and different things as our lives have evolved. But that leads me to my next question. Drea and Tamara, what kind of nerds are you?
So I said Omni Nerd because I love all the things I'm interested in, and I'm interested in a lot of different things. So I like cooking and baking. I like K-pop. I like comic books. I like movies and TV. So one of my sisters and I were watching Murdoch Mysteries, which is this Canadian gentle murder show that's been going on for like 15 years. And we just started watching it over the pandemic. I enjoy it. I'm a writer. I'm a nerd for storytelling in general. So whatever that takes form in. I first started playing D&D a couple of years ago. And now I'm a dice nerd, but it's great. Once you start playing and you get a set of dice, you will then start collecting as many dice as possible because there's so many of them and they're so pretty.
Truth.
Yes, and sometimes they betray you.
You put them in dice jail if you have to.
Yes, you got to do it. So yeah, Omni Nerd, all the things. There's more things to be interested in. Mythology, like learning about ancient civilizations, just all the things.
And how about you, Dre?
So I said dilettante because there's just not enough hours in the day to delve into it. But Tamara hit on a couple of many things, and maybe that's why we're such good friends. Like Greek mythology, I remember borrowing the same book in the library all the time so I could memorize all the Greek myths, took classes in it, but never took it any further. Love music, going to live concerts. I say I'm a music nerd or band nerd, how I met y'all. I'm a self-proclaimed word nerd, but I say dilettante because I can't quite always remember them, but I love polysyllabic words. So much so that I actually started taking online course in linguistics.
Wow.
And then technology. I mean, I'm an engineer classically by training, so I just love anything technology, electricity running through it.
I was going to say, can I imagine how cool it is that you took an engineering degree into the film industry? I mean, I know there's a few points along the path there to get to where you are, but it blows my mind to think about like the origins. You don't ever think, and I don't think most people think engineering degree into movie studio type work, but it's there. It has to be there, especially now with all the streaming and the way the industry has evolved is pretty crazy. Well, I'm super excited. And what I'm nerding about right now, as both of you are talking and introducing yourselves, is that we have 3 women of color, which I think is also pretty unique, not only to the podcast world, but to talking about these nerdisms, which segues me a little bit into Comic Cons. So as a little bit of a background for the both of you to know, and for our listeners to know, Rob and I have never been to any sort of Comic Con or Nerd Con of any type, with one exception. If I speak on Rob's behalf, Rob mentioned that he has been to something called Nerdtacular, which was in Utah. He went for a few years in a row, and it's just all board gaming. Not, I want to say gaming, but it's not, from my understanding, it's not video gaming. It's just all tabletop games. Yeah. So he went to that for a few years, and that was the closest to any sort of con that he or I have ever been to. So we bring you both onto the episode to talk about Comic Cons. Tamara, if I start with you, can you talk to me about how many times roughly, the types of cons you've been to start?
I have gone, Andrea, do you remember the first year we went was that 2000? You
mean with the murder hotel? Because I think we went before I went to the murder hotel.
Oh, we did.
2005.
Okay, wait, hold on. Murder hotel, you mean a sketcy place you stayed, or was that a theme of Comic Con?
I wish. No. It was maybe the sketchiest hotel I've ever stayed in.
Yeah, we had to go out to like CVS or something, like almost hold like a seance to like cleanse the place. It was so foul.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. So I thought it was around 2005. So that means I've been going to cons for 15 years before the pandemic happened. Rob has been to a con, so that's a lie, because tabletop board game, they count as a con. I know that when people say con, they mean comics specifically now, specifically because San Diego Comic-Con is the it brand. That's like the biggest one, and then New York is after that, and then like either Emerald City or Chicago, depending on who you ask. Those are like the top, 4, we'll say, that has the most entertainment presence. WonderCon is a pretty big one as well. They're run by the same people who do San Diego. They do have TV stuff there too, but it still feels on a smaller scale, but it does have like big scale cosplayers there. So you get to see some amazing costumes there. So I've gone to San Diego, I think every year for like 15 years. I've been to WonderCon probably 10 years. I've been to Long Beach a couple of times. I've been to, it's now Los Angeles Comic Con. It used to be Kamikaze. I've been there since it started. I've not made it out of state to any of the fun ones. Like there's a lot of ones in Vegas. So they'll have Trek cons. They'll have, why wouldn't you have a bunch of conventions in Vegas? I mean,
Vegas is all conventions. I lived there for 9 years and I still never went to anything.
Yeah. So it's, it just makes sense to have it. Lots of hotels, lots of space, And I started out going as a civilian and then I got into freelance entertainment. I've basically been working varying degrees for a long time. And then the last about 5 years, I think it was, I started being a panelist. So I was able to level up through, my first panel was, I think 2011 at Los Angeles Comic Con. So my specialty has always been talking about inclusion and representation. And so these were things I was talking about before it became a mainstream thing. I did ask a showrunner why all the Black people on their show were dead or jerks. I did not mean to phrase it that way, but it's true, so I have no regrets. But this was like, nobody was really talking about it like that at the time. So that there are a lot of wide eyes around the table.
And I definitely want to hear more about your experience as a panelist. If I move you from that for a second,
sure.
and interrupt you for that for a second. And
please, because I'll ramble.
No, that's okay. Rambling is good, especially in a media format that we can edit. But first, Drea, can you talk to us about, or I would say, your con experience?
I think the first Comic Con, right? San Diego, the con was 2006, but I actually have memories. My dad would take me to like these little local like comic book conventions. It would be like in the basement of a hotel and they would have like all the comic book boxes just there. And I would buy like Wonder Woman comics like for $1, which like, when you're like 7 years old is like super expensive. And now like that's a freaking deal. So I've probably been going to like those little tiny rinky dink conventions since I was, 9 or so years old. And Comic-Con was always, actually my dad had gone to Comic-Con before me. I'm remembering this now. And he came back with like all these comic books, like, look, they're just giving away for free. And, this was not the con that we know today, right? Where it's like, it's a spreader event now for COVID. there's no way. So I remember my dad telling me about Comic-Con and it was like this mecca, to always try to get there. And finally got to go there. But before that, actually, me and Tamara would go to some local comic book conventions near USC at the Shrine. Always, though, I felt like me and Tamara were always like the token women of color and, looked like we took showers and took care of ourselves, to put it nicely. So I guess so cons have always been, and then as an engineer, always standing out as a woman of color. I won't say I felt awkward. It almost just felt regular, to go to conventions. It didn't feel weird. And then, we would learn the tricks going to Comic-Con. When you go to Comic-Cons in general, any convention, if you want to see a panel, we've learned you got to be there 2 panels beforehand because they're going to fill up. Don't ever expect to show up and get the thing that you want, ever.
Yeah, we can run through the tricks by local one to see which
yeah.
And for sure, that is a question for sure for anyone who hasn't been. I just can't help but feel that I look at it from the outside, right? I can read. I did some research for the episode and, San Diego Comic Con started in the 70s and, 2020 was the 50th anniversary, which I know was halted because of the pandemic. And I think it was virtual. It was hosted virtually.
Yes, they had a virtual. Okay. I was on one of those that's still up there.
There we go. What I could read about it is it started as that idea of comic book lovers getting together and people who are fans of different comic books and a bit of a trade show, if you will, people selling comics and people looking for investors because they have an idea about a comic book at a time when you couldn't just go print off your own and sell them online. It turned into what we now know as maybe a media blitz by the entertainment industry. My only connection to anything Comic-Con is Drea knew all the things. You knew all the things I was nerdy about. So you would send me pictures like, oh, look, they're here from Dexter because you love that show. I think I actually still have a pair of headphones, like some of the swag you brought back and gave to me. I have a set of headphones that are like Dexter and all red like it's blood. By the way, we're talking about the Showtime Dexter for listeners, not the cartoon. My only other point of reference on Comic Cons is an episode of Entourage, which the character Johnny Drama goes to sell autographed pictures at a booth because he was in a show that nerds like, and it just looks like pandemonium. But it looks like fun. And so I'm really sad that I've never actually gone and genuinely interested. Based on what your experiences, both of you, did Comic-Con create cosplay and the industry of cosplay?
I think that it did not create it, but it helped people recognize it in the States. Like I can't speak to, because I know that in Japan there's a lot of cosplay going on there prior to it even being as big of a deal here, and I don't know the exact history of it, but I do think that more than just San Diego local news coverage happened, then it became the thing. And like the people in costumes are such a iconic image. I mean, honestly, the technical skills of these cosplayers, a lot of them, is unbelievable. Better than some of the people that get paid to do movies in some cases. Because like I've seen actual transformer costumes with like mechanics in it. Like I've seen it. The guy will go down a thing, he'll be an Optimus Prime, and his whole thing will turn into a truck. Just wild stuff. They have an android building brigade that's part of the Star Wars. So there's a lot of droids running around and looping at you. So that's really fun because R2D2 talked to me one day and that was very nice. So it's a fun sort of thing. So I think it definitely helped propel the image of a cosplayer and that art into general media.
I don't know if it invented it, as Tamara said, in Japan it's huge there, but I think it helped really normalize it. Right? Because let's say I'm thinking right now as I go to Disneyland, adults can't dress as princesses, only the little kids. But then you go to D23, which is like every other year, and adults just go for it. And because the Disneyverse, right, owns Star Wars and Marvel and Pixar, I mean, you now see Leia's, like slave Leia's at D23. You see like sexy Ariels. You see just this amazing stuff. And then even at Comic-Con, I remember one year I had a personal trainer and there was this guy who's also a trainer. And I saw him in the DC booth and he was dressed as freaking Superman and he was amazing. I was like, oh my God, you're an incognito freaking comic book nerd who dresses up. Like, I love it. So that was also another nice thing about Comic-Con is you'll run into people that you would never guess in your life would be there. And it brings us out of the woodwork. And one of the things I say about nerds is nerds create and we congregate. And Comic-Con is like the perfect example of that.
You bring up a good point there, Drea. In our last episode, we had an author of a book called The Wisdom of Gunkles and talking about, gay uncles who impart wisdom to their nieces, nephews, their nibblings. And the LGBTQ community for the nerd chapter in that book talks a lot about intersectionality. So what you're saying is the Comic-Con is that place where these intersectionalities just really come to light. And I think, Tamara, you were starting to indicate on that with the panels you were on. And then, Drea, you talked about really being recognizable as one of the very few women of color in these spaces. Do either of you see how Comic-Cons have helped the idea of the chosen family under these nerd spectrums? And what have you seen at cons that you think have really helped with that?
There's so many people that come from all over the world, right, to Comic-Con. It's that nice middle ground, that mecca. And if anything, it's like, hey, it's not just me who loves this. And it's not just me who dresses like this or looks like this or thinks like this, and even socioeconomic, like it just brings so many wonderful people together. And then for the cosplay, they have the costume ball, which I've always wanted to go to, where people can kind of come together. They're really great about having events, 24/7, right? They'll have like these free movie watching. They have events all throughout downtown San Diego, which are fabulous for people. If you love Dexter, if you love Wonder Woman, if you love Hello Kitty, pick a thing. And that's what actually kind of made me a little bit sad. It's a double-edged sword because once the movie studios and the other bigger entities came in, these events became more accessible or available. But before that, it was really more comic book focused. And there are parts of me that do miss the days of being able to just look through stacks and buy books. And as Tamara was speaking, I was remembering a panel that we were in with Kevin Smith. And it was the year that, was it X-Men? I guess they were blowing up buses of mutants here and there. It was that panel.
Yeah.
And Kevin Smith, he's the moderator, and he goes, holy crap, we're in a panel that talks about comic books. Everything is movie and TV, which is why I think they also adapted it during the time Tamara had been going as comic book and media and arts, right? Because I think they recognize it was no longer just comic book focused.
Okay.
It's also about visibility, right? Like,
okay, good point.
It is a place where prior to social media, it was weird trying to find someone else who was a nerd. And I remember, I think it was sophomore year, and I don't remember what it was, but we were talking about something. Andrea said something about, and I was like, oh, she does comic books. And I was like, I found another one. It's like, at that point, you just didn't know how to find people as easily because it's, the start of all that stuff. So now people of color, people who are not just straight white cis dudes, are much more visible. And the thing is, we've always been here. My thing always is if a white guy, a straight cis white guy who's a jerk says, I've never met a woman or a just whatever marginalized community member that's been a nerd, it's because you suck and they don't want to have a conversation about it with you.
They're like willfully choosing to ignore the fact that this demographic has existed the entire time. Women have been equally into comics.
They're the reason why women are the reason why Star Trek still exists, by the way. Like, if you go back and look at it, in the 70s, there was a group of women fans that had a fanzine that had fanfic about Star Trek, the original series, and that's part of the reason why it survived all that time. So I'm just saying we're here. So it's not, we've always been here. We always will be here. If women or people of color or some marginalized communities not talking to you specifically about it, is because they do not feel safe to talk to you about it for whatever reason.
Along those lines, what can either of you talk about as you've seen this progression of more acceptance, not only in the comic books, right? You know, I mean, you have Miss Marvel now, you have all this representation, not only in the movies, but in comic books themselves. As both of you have attended Comic Cons, of course, there's always blowback by what we'll call the loud majority of fans of comic book or comic cons. What is that space like, and how has it evolved at cons for people of color, for the LGBTQ community, for women?
I've never been uncomfortable at a con. I have been uncomfortable in some comic book stores, you know, and that's also the benefit of being in Southern California. It's a very diverse place. So any place that we're going to that's a local convention is going to have the local people there, and it's a local diverse community. So I don't think I've ever been in a space that was a convention space that I did not see at least a good chunk of something else that I visually can identify. Little comic book stores are different because it's about kind of positions of power. So it's the people who are working there that are judging you or asking you, you know, extra questions or trying to mansplain things to you. Like, you don't have like 500 issues of Wonder Woman. I will say that for San Diego Comic-Con in specific, I think the biggest kind of visible female presence started when the Twilight movies were coming out. And that's part of the thing that really turned it from a convention to kind of like an epic convention, because Twilight fans are diehards. They were lining up and
violent
out, like, a little bit. And so they were just like super into it. And like, you know, there are some people who used to, you know, 20 people, 50 people maybe would sleep outside to get a space in a panel at Hall H or whatever, but it wasn't as widespread as it is now. So that was the thing that kicked that off. So it was like 500 women and girls sleeping out to try to get this to this thing for whatever days they would buy it. That's how all the tickets got bought out so early, because they didn't have a schedule when the tickets went on. And so that kind of saw an influx of largely straight cis women. And these are people who are more specialty fans because they may not have been into other things that were there, but a lot of them have since branched out and found other things that they were into, which is really cool. But I feel like that was like the bigger influx. That was like the change.
And my side chat about violence, I remember, I think it was the last year that Twilight was there. I remember hearing in a line, they're like, oh my God, someone stabbed another person in the eye or the face with a pencil, because they wanted to be in the front row, Hall H, and people.
Yes, those were dudes, though.
Were those dudes? I can't remember.
Those were dudes. It was dudes, and they were inside. I can't remember exactly what happened. It was like a Thursday.
People really want to be in front.
Yeah, and that wasn't even about Twilight, by the way. That was like Marvel, I think. Excuse me.
I thought
that was Marvel.
It was either Twilight or Harry Potter. I remember.
Or maybe it might have been Harry Potter too.
Yeah. So for me, I haven't been to con, gosh, for maybe like 4 years or so. But the last one I went to, I feel like there was a bigger presence, at least, of women in terms of in the media. I remember going to an Atomic Blonde premiere, and one of the cool things they did is they gave everyone blonde wigs, and men, like I was all with guys, and they were wearing the Atomic Blonde wigs, and they were loving it. And right, like if you haven't seen the movie, it's like freaking John Wick, but style, and she's kicking ass and she's getting tired. It's great. I love it. I feel like there's a lot more representation of women. In terms of LGBTQ, sadly, nothing comes to mind that resonates in my memory. But for some reason, I'm thinking about, so on Sundays, Comic-Con used to do was like family day. And so at least in that way, I thought that was kind of neat. I mean, the programming wasn't as great. Although one year they had Harold and Kumar go to Guantanamo Bay on family day. Really weird. Not at all family appropriate.
What?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
There's some questionable programming things that there hasn't been a marked increase on LGBTQ plus panels and panelists. I think a lot of openly identifying LGBTQ plus people are are big names, particularly in the comic industry, which is a big deal because it is that stereotype of, the straight white cis dude thing has such a hold in a lot of these arenas. And it's just the imaging of it, because it's like, as I was saying, it's not been true this whole time. It's always been a diverse number of people, but I think it's a lot easier for the people who have always been there to be more visible. So,
well, and for sure, like all the industries themselves, the LGBTQ is the slowest kind of upcomer over other minority groups, but that doesn't keep from LGBTQ identifying people with finding a place at Comic-Con, in cosplay, again, with that idea of chosen families, people you choose to bond with over things is certainly helped through events like Comic-Con. What we're seeing right now in terms of media, television, film, book, comic books, is there's now more queer identifying people that are emerging in storylines. We have yet to really have a queer person at the forefront. The Superman is the LGBTQ identified person, or the main character, which is neither here nor there. The acceptance of the LGBTQ community from the outside, again, someone who's never been to Comic-Con, just appears to be a safe place for people who are questioning themselves in the first place, and can identify, people who identify as men wanting to try out makeup. Comic-Con is certainly a place that can happen. A male identified person dressing up as Wonder Woman, I'm sure, is something you may have both seen, something along those lines, because that becomes the place where it is acceptable. And it's not, it definitely, Comic-Cons are that place where someone can express themselves in ways that may be not as acceptable in general public.
Yeah, they feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and most of the nerds that I know, or basically all the nerds that I know, are very open, accepting people. And I think that intersectionality with other arts spaces is what helps that, because there's a lot of like theater kid, there's a lot of like band kid, and like such a hodgepodge of just all kinds of stuff. There are people that that end up being gay, or they end up being trans, or they're bisexual, or they're whatever, So I think that definitely helps. And I think that, again, this loud minority of people who want this identity to be this one thing, it was never that one thing. They just have to be more accepting of the fact that it was never that one thing and will never be that one thing.
At least remind me of something, as flashbacks of memories, waiting in line 13 hours to see a thing. When you wait in line, you meet all kinds of people, right? This is how a lot of people actually really meet a great deal of the time at Comic-Con, is you're spending hours in line with these people. So what do we talk about? You're my line buddy, hey, I got to go get a thing. You want some? So some of these people are not very talkative, and not that they're anti-people, it's just social skills need to be developed, right? And so this is a way that people can do that, whether they realize it or not. But I'm also thinking about, what is that number of people that don't go to Comic-Con because they don't like giant crowds? Right? Pre-COVID, like it took a lot, I think, for some of the people that I met in line to not just get the money to get there, but just to get there and be around all these people, like all the time. There's a lot of anxiety there. And I'd like to think, in what I've seen, at least in my work world, is, the silver lining of the pandemic is, if you will, is there's a lot more virtual events. And so we're seeing a lot of people attend events that would never, ever done it otherwise, because now they're getting access to things that are not in their backyard that they can log on to, just like how we're all talking now. So I was sad that I didn't get to go to Comic-Con last year, the virtual, because I really think this virtual idea is really cool. I've been telling Tamara for years, I will gladly pay $50 a day to just see a panel, because again, we'd have to wait 2 panels beforehand to see them when we want, not always get in or get a good seat. Like, why have we not been live streaming this stuff for, longer now? Because you can make so much money, you can hear everything. You wouldn't have to worry about people pirating the movie as you're seeing the trailer. I'm hoping to God that this is an outcome of that.
100%. I've been talking about some of if we can find any silver lining positives in the COVID-19 pandemic in all industry, the fact that in education, we have board meetings now available via Zoom, where they have multiple language interpretation and a sign language interpreter live right there. The access to things is so much better by being able to offer it. And frankly, some cheaper version for me, it was always money. Educator, I never really felt I had enough money to blow a few $100s here and there to join y'all at Comic-Con, because how easy would it have been to say, hey, yeah, get me a ticket. Yeah, include me in the hotel, even Murder Hotel. Like, it would have been super easy to do it. but I've never felt I had the expendable money as a teacher to be able to do so. So just the access, you're 100% right. It's exciting to think that that could be a beautiful, beautiful byproduct of the pandemic, which leads me to one of my next questions. Take the pandemic out of the equation. We're in our 40s now. Don't worry, I won't say exact age. We're all a bit older.
How dare you?
I embrace our age. I'm sorry. I love being our age. I
actually got carded the other day. I was really excited.
I mean, come on. That still happens to me too. It's probably more
several people at work were like, "You're 28." I'm like, haha, bless your heart. Sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say it might be the way I dress and
skin.
Hoodies and t-shirts and
the melanin,
makeup,
the moisturizing, the minding our business.
Yeah,
it's the fact that we all went to USC. That's my. Not everybody can be as perfect and beautiful and smart and intelligent. But being the age we are now, take the pandemic out of it. Take the idea that it might be a super spreader, as you mentioned, Andrea. Do you still go to Comic-Con?
Yes, I would. I still go. It is one of the things where I get the most. There are certain people, even though they live in LA, literally the only time I see them is at a convention, and specifically San Diego. It's stupid, but that's just the way it is. It is tiring, but it's super fun. I would never recommend somebody to go to San Diego Comic-Con for their first convention. It is such a huge event, and it is a lot to get into, like, the hotel apocalypse, and then, which is what we call when the hotels go on sale. Everything is very difficult to get in, and so it's Disneyland on its most packed day. Like, it is a lot of people. So I always recommend going to a smaller show first to see if you even like a convention. You might not even like it. It's a thing that could be fun. You can meet a lot of great people, or it could be too many people for you and you don't get to see enough stuff and it's too big. So like if you're in LA, go to WonderCon at Anaheim. It's basically run by the same people, has the same level of star. It may not have parties and things like that, but you get to see great costumes and things like that. It's a little easier to get to. Los Angeles Comic-Con, also easier to navigate. Tickets do get sold out, but it's not the crazy crush. Long Beach Comic-Con, I actually got a picture with Jason Momoa there, pre-Aquaman, because I didn't even think he was gonna, I was like, oh, who's even there? I just was gonna go because I got invited to be on a panel. So I was like, oh yeah. And so I was like, let me just look. This is the Friday, the day before the convention. I was like, I should look and see who's there. Maybe I can interview somebody or whatever. Saw Jason Momoa, saw who's doing photo ops. It was like $80, which sounds like a lot, but it's Jason Momoa. It is not a lot. I would have paid twice as much. He put his arm around me. He smelled like the woods. It was delightful. So, and especially if you're going specifically for comics as well, going to the smaller ones are better because either comic creators will be there. You can talk to them on the booth and get stuff signed. You can buy toys and do all that kind of stuff without the mad crush of people. It's a little bit more chill. I would go again. I'll still go. It's, still my people.
So I have the hybrid move modular approach, if you will. The past couple Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Cons I've been to, I've not purchased a badge because the inside is just so hectic to get from point A to point B. All the things that I love doing as a person and as Tamara, one of the things we love to do, we go to the DC booth, we wait in line for the artists or the writers. And one of the things I would ask the writers, tell me your 10 favorite words in the context of Wonder Woman, right? And they love that challenge. Or with the artist, draw me whatever. And to me, those are my most cherished memories. It's, I have a sketchbook full of things. You can't really do that now inside the convention center. But outside, as I mentioned earlier, there is so much stuff going on that does not require a badge. And that's what I've done the past 2 years that I've gone. It's I enjoy everything outside. My friend goes inside for a hot second to do a thing. And then we just enjoy outside. We did the sci-fi bus. I won all kinds of cool swag. There was the sci-fi hotel that they did. We happened to get into the Purge night little pop-up shop.
Yeah.
There's all these things everywhere around Comic-Con. So if you don't want to pay or can't afford to pay or for whatever reason want to do a day trip, go down to San Diego, enjoy all the outdoor experiences. And then if you want to actually get a convention experience, do the WonderCons, do the LAs, because it's a lot more bespoke and almost esoteric and just really, if that's really your jam, you can find that and not be waiting, 100 million years in line to do it.
Yeah, and everything, I really want to stress that there is a convention for everything. There is a Power Rangers convention in Pasadena. There is several tabletop things that go on all over the place. I think there's a My Little Pony convention that's somewhere in LA as well. Friendship is Magic most specifically, but you know, all iterations I'm sure are welcome. But there's a convention for everything because there are like-minded people who like a thing enough that they want to get to. And that's what it is. It's people who are fans of things who want to get together with other people who are fans and have a cool time talking about stuff and being a freaking nerd and maybe buy some stuff.
I have noticed that some of the entertainment industry has moved that way. I read that in 2019 or 2020, some of the bigger like Marvel not backed out, but pulled from such a big presence at Comic-Con, and a few other bigger industries or groups did the same. And likely that's because what you just hit on, Tamara, that they can do their own thing, right? I know there's Walking Dead cons all over the place. I see them advertised on Facebook or whatnot.
Supernatural conventions.
Right.
Same company runs a bunch of those.
Oh yeah. Was it WB did one, right? They did the virtual one last year where they
Fandom.
That was
They're doing
free,
that again this year.
super cool, on demand. You know, so if you couldn't be there live to watch it, you could watch it later.
I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Fandom, they made it a thing regularly instead of, like, they'll still do panels. Now, I think we've reached the saturation point. You know, the bubble it's not a burst so much as it's kind of leaking some air, making it a more manageable bubble.
Yeah, it's more like things are boiling over. But that's the thing, it's Comic-Con the past few years. I'm sure, Tamara, you can attest to this really better than I think those experiences outside are there because there's not enough space inside.
Yeah.
And they're running out of space. I mean, you have to get like on a freaking shuttle bus to go a million miles out just to get to another thing. And it's so big.
Yeah,
it needs to
kind of unmanageably big. Yeah. And like having the stuff outside, like Adult Swim usually has a carnival. So they have they did have rides once or twice. I don't remember if that's a thing that's normally, but it's mostly little games that you can play.
Yeah, they had some rides, like you do like little like go-karts, like in a little circle, and like, yeah, it's a really cool carnival. But you got to wait like 5 hours to get in.
Yeah. It's all a waiting game. And but the irony, of course, is that if you are going to San Diego Comic-Con and you like comic stuff, you probably won't have to wait in a 5-hour long line because everybody's going to Hall H and sleeping over, which, I mean, if you're paying good money for a hotel, I don't understand why you're sleeping on the floor, but that's just me.
Also, I mean, but I'm going to say that just speaks their age too. I mean, it just depends on what that thing is, right?
Yeah.
If they had Buffy the Vampire Slayer reunion, I can imagine the three of us would figure out a way to stand in line however long we needed. I'd stand in line however long I needed to figure that out, to trade spots with people. I don't know. I would do whatever I needed, but I mean, you as a presenter and you're both in the industry, I'm sure could figure out some other sneaky way that the teacher like me that has to sit outside for 3 days, if I have to, I would.
We could save up for VIP. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, but you know what I mean? There are things that I would stand outside for, without having those connections.
I've never been a camper is really what it is. I like the outdoors, but I'm not a camper. So that's really my thing. It's like, I like a lot of stuff and I like it a lot, but I also like beds. And I like not sleeping in bugs. So that's just really my personal thing.
And I can't say that I've ever stayed outside in a line for days to see something. I know way back in high school, we went to Reno Jazz Festival and Arturo Sandoval was having a clinic and we waited the day in line to be in like third row for Arturo Sandoval and this little teeny room that he presented to like 200 people, and we were five of those 200 people. Like, that was worth seeing. I could see myself something more extreme. CES one year, I stood outside with free tickets to see Fleetwood Mac. Yeah. I waited for hours and hours. My partner had left. My best friend had left. They'd all gone home. And I waited and was able to get a seat. Actually, I like way extra benefits. I ended up at a table with a bunch of people who had left. I can't even remember what company it was, but next to me was a table with, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and T-Boz and a whole bunch of people. And I was geeking out the entire time while they were there to watch Fleetwood Mac, just like the rest of us. So, there are definitely things I could see myself standing in line for.
Standing in line for hours is different because I'm bougie. I do not like camping. I'll wait in line for 8 hours for something. I've done it before. I'll do it again. Standing up for a long time is nothing. We were in the band. It's nothing. It's a game day. I'll do it. I don't have a problem with it. It's just the overnight sleeping on the ground thing where I'm just
the cold thing. Yeah, I mean, I've purchased chairs just because of Comic-Con. Like, I'm always looking for lightweight chairs that I can pack into a bag to wait in line comfortably.
there are also other people where it's like, if there was like a Linda Carter meet and greet kind of thing, I would be tempted, but also I love her so much that I don't know if I could meet her at this point. Just to be normal in front of her, I don't know if I can accomplish that.
Have I told both of you the story about how I talked to Wonder Woman?
No. How dare you?
So our freshman year, I don't know if either of you remember, but I was matched up with pretty horrible roommates to start. And I let me back that up. There was really only the one that I shared a room with. We did not get along. And I was the only one left in that apartment by mid-year. One had been able to have her dad get her out of the contract so she could live in a sorority house. One left the school. And then my roommate, we were talking early on, and she was like, oh yeah, my Aunt Linda, and like, oh, cool. And she's like, oh, well, my aunt is Linda Carter. And I went, wait, what? She goes, yeah. And so I totally forget about that. Time passes by. We're later in the semester, freshman year is a thing in the USC band. So never thought about it. And that we're talking about 1996 to listeners. That means we had a house phone, no cell phones. We had a house phone that was shared between everybody. So there's a little notepad next to the phone that you take the messages and, this, that, and the other. So I pick up the phone one day and, oh, hey, is so-and-so there? Oh, no, she's in class. Can I take a message? Yeah. Can you tell her Aunt Linda called? I said, sure. And she's like, how are you doing today? I said, I'm great. How are you? It's just a nice little, whatever. I write down, okay, I'll let her know that you called. Okay, you have a nice day. And hung up the phone and thought nothing of it. And a few hours later, my roommate comes home and says, hey, what's going on? And I was like, oh, hey, your Aunt Linda called. And she goes, okay. And she stands there and she's staring at me. And I go, what? She goes, you talked to my Aunt Linda? Yeah, my Aunt Linda Carter. Oh my God, I talked to Wonder Woman. Like I flipped out. So it was a brief conversation, but I had at least spoken to her once. But you're right, I would stand in line to meet her.
I would stand in line to see her, yeah.
And it is but the grace of the universe that you did not recognize her at the time, because I don't think you would have been able to have a normal phone call with her.
Oh no, my head probably would explode. I probably would have been a heap on the floor crying, going, oh my God, I can't believe I thought. Yeah, I probably would have made a fool of myself.
Catwoman lovingly smushed Drea's face at a Frankenstein's when we were standing in line for the autographs.
Oh, that was at the shrine.
Yeah, the Frankenstein's. Yeah. So we were standing in line at Frankenstein's. That is where I spent a lot of money.
She was always taking off. I found another one.
I was like, I'm gonna find some anime tapes. I'll be right back. And so we were standing in line, got autographs, and she was like, "Oh, you're so lovely," and put both of her hands on Drea's cheeks and smushed. Not like as a gentle smush, obviously.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
See, I will say one thing I love about our college experience, being where it is and being in the USC band, we inevitably found ourselves around celebrities. Mm-hmm. I'm really thankful for that experience to not make a fool of myself when we run into celebrities. Just being in LA, right? Being around celebrities has been nice. Kevin Costner came to a football game here in Santa Barbara. I don't know what the connection is, but it was at our rival school and we were all there because administrators have to be present. And he came to our gate and I had to tell him and his family to go to the other gate for the home team. And I so badly wanted to say, like, little context, that school's stadium is brand new. They just had it rebuilt. I want to say they built it and you came. But of course I was smart enough to not make a stupid remark.
It's so hard to be professional sometimes.
I told you this, Annalise. I saw Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr. on my plane.
Yes.
Mm. And I happen to have like Buffy #1 comic in my backpack. Don't know how and why. And so when we're all getting our bags, I was like, no. It took so much of me to like not approach her. Yeah. But it was still like really cool. Like, oh my God, there she is. I want to touch you.
But again, game.
Going to SC, right? You're just like, you see Lily Tomlin and Jimmy Smits and all these people just going around on golf carts. You're like, okay.
They filmed episodes of Buffy there. I remember stalking this, like, outside of the sets, watching them all like come in and out of trailers and stuff. So, I mean, we're pretty lucky. So that if attending a Comic Con with celebrities would not be a really big deal for us to not, I don't know, who knows for real, geek out or not geek out, but I know time is precious and I know there's so much more we can talk about, but I appreciate the tips. I love the insight. I love your willingness to talk to us and our listeners about your experiences as women of color. Tamara, for sure, I may have mentioned this outside of recording this episode. Somewhere down the line, we fully plan on doing, a women in comics type of deal and some of that, people of color you mentioned earlier. I would love to dive deeper into that sometime down the line with the podcast. Andrea, I know you and I have spoke about your experiences in the in the industry. I can imagine our listeners would be really interested in separately. If I may say so, your husband is a CGI artist in the industry, and I would love to hear about his nerdism path into that career. So there's so much wisdom and input both you ladies can bring to this podcast. I'm really thankful for your time. I want to invite you to participate in a piece of our episode that Rob and I do every week. And if you could answer 2 questions for me. The first question being, what is the nerdiest thing you did last week? And Andrea, let's start with you.
There's 2 that come to mind. One was I was talking to a girlfriend about the new Pokemon Oreos and how we want to catch them all. And the other one, I was talking to another fellow nerd. And I forget what we were talking about, but then we're like, $1 million. And then we started talking about how Austin Powers and that whole thing. We're like, no, you got to ask for more because today $1 million won't buy you crap.
How about Austin Powers has so many lines that are used now that people just don't really realize that's the origin of it. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
that's good stuff. How about you, Tamara? Or I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, you said you wanted one this week, right? So we're still doing this past week.
Yeah, that's just the nerdiest thing you did this week. So, Tamara, what's the nerdiest thing you did last week?
It's kind of hard to just every waking moment feels like a nerdy moment. I think it would be that I was measuring all of the art pieces that I've always intended to put on my walls that I never got to. So from cons and things like that. So I measured them all out and I have a list of the about size frame I need to get them framed. And I'm also contemplating, I'm going to start doing measurements on the walls to see how I'm going to grid them out. So that's kind of up there. And it's not the nerdiest thing I've ever done, but it's up there, probably.
Tamara, I'll start with you this time. What is the nerdiest thing you're going to do next week? I'm
going to research a specific type of monster to write I'm custom writing some D&D adventure one-shots because I don't have time to study existing ones, number one, to run for people. And number two, I want to write something for those who are going to start playing. One-shots are not always able to be played in one day or one 2 to 4 hour session. So my goal is to write ones that you can play in that amount of time. So that's my project for this next week.
Very good. Andrea, what's the nerdiest thing you're going to do next week?
I am a Willy Wonka fanatic. I watched that movie so many times as a kid. I have it memorized. And so even behind me, I know there's a glare. It's 100% soft print of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So in the movie on October 1st, the kids enter the chocolate factory. So on October 1st, I will be watching the original Willy Wonka with Gene Wilder and see those little kids enter the chocolate factory.
Very cool. I didn't know it was specifically October 1st. That's said in the book?
No, it's in the movie. They say it in the movie. It's on the ticket.
I never even noticed that. Learned something new.
The things you know, the things you learn.
The more you know. Well, I certainly, like I said, time is precious. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So I want to thank you both for being on our podcast today and love you both. And I can't wait to see you at homecoming. And otherwise, I know this conversation, that's one of the things that happened with our episodes earlier. These conversations can just go and go and go and go. So thank you both for being here and we'll talk really soon.
Thank you
for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Once again, we want to thank our guests, Andrea Avila and Tamara Brooks, for their time and their information.
So, Rob, what is the nerdiest thing you did this week?
So as you know, I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast, but I don't make New Year's resolutions anymore. New Year's resolutions are all about things you want to change or things you want to stop doing or something bad. So instead, what we like to do is just arbitrarily, we take the year, right? So it's 2021. We choose 21 things we want to do that are exciting to us or projects that we want to get done, but it's all about want and cool. So let's put a list together of 21 for 21 things that I want to get done. This year, I got 21 things. Most of them have to do with getting stuff done. And by getting stuff done, I mean nerdy game room projects like painting boxes of miniatures or finishing 3D printed game type projects and things like that. So the nerdiest thing I did this week is I got to knock 2 items on my Trello board and slide them over to the mission accomplished column when I finished a box of miniatures for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles board game or skirmish game. And also I finished that project of 3D printing the entirety of the Castle Ravenloft board game. So those two got moved on over.
Amazing. And I've certainly joined you the last 2 years with the year goals, if you will, rather than resolutions. So that's exciting that you get to move two over as we are heading towards the end of 21. For me, the nerdiest thing I did this week was put a bookshelf here in my little office space of my apartment for a few reasons, but mostly because while we are a podcast audio media, we are on Zoom with our special guests, and sometimes that includes a screenshot that we put out on our social media. And I started to want to have a nerd display behind me. And so I'm starting to build this little corner of the apartment that we just moved in maybe 6-7 months ago. And I was taking selfies. I was taking pictures of myself on Zoom by myself so I can see what it looked like behind me when I'm standing up, when I'm sitting down, because it's a convertible desk. So the nerdy thing I did this week was to see how, like, which comic book should I put up front? What should I rotate next? Depend on the episode. Should I have the Wisdom of Gunkles up there when we did that episode? And you can see right now, there's actually something you gave me right there. Our listeners can't see, but it's a little Spike figurine from Buffy the Vampire Slayer that we can't see because the screen is reflecting on it. I didn't notice that before. So now I'm going to have to rearrange to try to make sure all this stuff is seen. So that's pretty nerdy thing that I did last week. And
Fiesta Giles, though, coming in strong back there.
Fiesta Giles is amazing. That was a wedding gift from one of my former roommates who I watched Buffy with while we were in college. So front and center, Fiesta Giles is very rare. It's a get. So what's the nerdiest thing you're going to do next week, Rob?
Next week is all about furniture. Another one of the exciting things that I've been wanting to do is get this nerd room of doom back here organized. And so lots of furniture has been coming in. Drawers and display shelves and cabinets and cupboards are stacking up in huge boxes. And so we're going to have to start putting some effort into building furniture, getting this place organized, because I don't want a cave back here. I want a nice, fresh, bright place that people want to be, not a mess over here in my game room.
Well, if I may say so, as someone who's been to your place, it does not seem like a cave, but I hear what you mean about the organization and the sleekness, the visual sleekness you're looking for. I think you've done a great job organizing the multitude of nerd that you have all over your area there. So I'm looking forward, and obviously we'll likely be there helping you build stuff. So keep that in mind, that I might be part of your nerdiest thing next week. Speaking of Buffy again, my nerdiest thing for next week, my partner has never seen Buffy. I think I've mentioned this on a couple episodes before, and we are right at the last 2 episodes of season 2, Becoming Part 1, Becoming Part 2, which are on my top 10 best episodes ever. So I'm really, really geekily excited to show her these last 2 episodes, which in my opinion is very much some of the strongest part of the 7-year series. So she doesn't know anything about it. She doesn't know anything that happens after. So she's half been like, oh, Angel better not die. Angel better not die. And then as the season progresses, that dude has got to go. So it's going to be really interesting to watch someone watching this for the first time without having any context of what happens after. So I'm very nerdily excited about watching.
Oh my gosh. Listeners need to know how much of a Buffy the Vampire Slayer nerd Annalise is, and how much pressure there is on this. It's going to be the last episode of the season, right? Is the Buffy episode?
The Buffy episode is the last episode before we go on winter break.
Okay. I have been going back through Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm through season 2. I got a long way to go, but man, oh man, I'm cranking through it because I don't want to let you down.
I know. I definitely am looking forward to recording that episode with you. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think we have enough likeness and enough differentness in perspectives of the show that I think it's going to make for a really good episode. So I'm excited. Our next episode is Batman's Best, where we will rate and discuss which movies, comics, or TV shows displays Batman's best villains, sidekicks, origin stories, and more.
That is going to be a fun one. We know that you have something to say about this episode. Join in on the conversation by following us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at NerdBestFriends, or send us a message by writing to NerdBestFriends@gmail.com. Please make sure you like, follow, share our podcast, and check back in 2 weeks for that Batman episode.
And with that said, Rob, it's always a pleasure to nerd out with you, my friend.
I feel the same. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks for listening, everyone. You're in a space of no apologies.
What was the question again?